Do you like bananas? Do you like avocados? Do you like chocolate? For the older crowd, do you like margaritas, tequila? All of these things we have thanks to a very special pollinator that we are going to talk about today. Hi, I'm Amy Landers with Gardens That Matter, where we help families create beautiful, bountiful gardens together. And we are talking about pollinators. So, do you have a guess? Do you have a guess who pollinates bananas, avocados, cacao, which is what we make chocolate from, agave, which is what we make tequila from? Any guesses? It's bats. Bats are pollinators. Not all bats, but some bats are pollinators. So we are talking about pollinators over this week and next week because we are going to do a big pollinator workshop next Friday, June 9th. There is a link in the description that you can go over and sign up and learn about how you can garden for pollinators in your own backyard. So we'll talk a little bit about where these pollinating bats live in a few minutes. But I want you to think about something. So we have about, scientists estimate, here, I'll put them up here, just so we can kind of pay homage to the wonder that is bat pollination. So there are about 200,000 different species that scientists have identified as pollinators. The vast majority are insects. So your typical bats and butterflies that we think of, right? There's beetles, there's flies. We're going to talk about some of those in future daily videos. But there are about 1,000 pollinators that are bats, other small mammals like mice and birds. So it's pretty incredible to think about that there are these 200,000 pollinators. So many are insects, so many we don't know that much about. And then there's some that are these bigger animals that we sometimes still don't know a lot about, right? Bats are still kind of mysterious for us, but they're still so important, right? They make up a small number of the pollinators, but there are about 500 different fruits and medicinal plants and different plants that we use that depend on bat pollination. So we've talked about bananas, avocados, cacao, agave, which makes tequila. So let me give you a couple more. Cashews, guavas, mangoes, dates, even peaches. So bats are pollinators that can carry a lot of pollen. So let's talk a little bit about how it works, right? So these flowers tend to be night blooming, as you might guess. Sometimes they bloom day and night, so birds will be pollinators in the daytime, and other insects will be, not other insects, and insects will be pollinators during the daytime, and then bats will take the night shift. A lot of times they have a bell shape. So you can see in this picture, this is a lesser long-nosed bat, and look at him sticking his face in to that flower. So a bell-shaped flower, usually really pretty high up in the air. So that flower is from our friend the saguaro cactus. Then they tend to have a musty odor. Sometimes they're a stinky odor, like a little bit rotten. So bats will sometimes use their sense of smell to find the flowers. Sometimes they'll use their sense of sight. They tend to be kind of white, so saguaro flowers are white. The agave is another one. So this is a Mexican long-tailed bat. So kind of a white color, so they're more visible at night. And some bats even use their echolocation to find flowers. Especially in dense tropical rainforests, flowers have actually adapted to have unique shapes that bats know, oh, a flower. So of course we think of bats as insect eaters, and for most of us across the US, our bats are insect eaters. These nectar-eating bats live in tropical and subtropical regions of South America, Central America, up into lower parts of California, Arizona, New Mexico, maybe some down in the tip of Texas as well. And then they live in tropical and subtropical areas in Africa and Asia. So you can think of these bats as, it makes sense that they are the pollinators of these tropical fruits that we think of, right? So cacao, bananas, mangoes, these all come from tropical places. So these bats have the ability to hover. So think hummingbird. Bats can totally hover like a hummingbird. I'm going to add, after I post this video, I'm going to add a link to a really cool, a couple of cool videos so that you can go watch more like bats in action if you're curious. So they tend to have long tongues. So of course this guy, he is a bat that is found in the southwestern US, Mexican long-tongued bat. And so it's a little bit hard to see in this picture, but his tongue is down in here. Like this is pink bat tongue right here. I was just reading earlier today about a bat species in Ecuador that they found that has a bat that's that's so long that it has like a special way to pull it into its body where it like goes into its chest. And the equivalent, like the example they used to help you understand how long this bat's tongue is compared to its body, is that if our tongue was this long, it would be 9 feet long. So can you imagine a 9-foot long tongue? That's how long this bat from Ecuador's tongue is. And it pollinates a special flower, and it's the only pollinator of this flower with a really long tube, a really long trumpet-shaped flower. And so the bat and the flower are perfect for each other, right? They have evolved over time together, and the bat is the only pollinator for this flower, and that flower is one of the most important food sources for this bat. So why does this super long tongue bat, I didn't learn its Latin name, but I'll add a link to it to the video, to the description, or to the comments later on. But this super long tongued bat, the Mexican long tongued bat, the lesser long-nosed bat, what are they doing with all this nectar? It is bat power, bat energy. So they are getting the nectar because that's what they eat. Usually nectar-eating, feeding bats are also eating pollen, which has really good protein. They'll also be eating fruit later on. And sometimes they will be a little bit more generalist. They might eat other things too, but generally they are, like, bats are either insectivores, so they're flying around catching mosquitoes, which is what we tend to think of, or they're frutivores and nectarivores, frugivores. So let's see what else we can tell you. What else is fascinating? You can see, like, in this picture, what an effective pollinator they are, right? This flower has definitely evolved to be pollinated by a bat. Look at all these pollen sacs. That bat has to stick its whole face in here to get nectar from the bottom of the trumpet. It is covered with pollen. So scientists find bats that are just like covered in pollen. Then it's going to fly to the next one, and as it drinks from the next flower, it's going to pollinate it, right? Bats fly long distances, so they can move pollen across long distances and really increase biodiversity within species that they're pollinating. So very, very cool. Now, what about the bat's plant? So all week this week, we're talking about the pollinator and the plant. So yesterday we talked about one of our favorites, monarchs and milkweed. Today, bats, and the plant I want to talk to you about is agave. So agave is one of the plants that's a typical bat plant, in addition to all these things. And so you guys can maybe picture agave, but I have a few pictures to show you out of my guide to the national parks of the Southwest. So look at this, gorgeous. So these are succulents. They have amazing structure and like interesting year-round. Here's another one in the snow. Look how gorgeous this is. Such interesting geometry and pattern. They're absolutely gorgeous. So agaves can grow in a lot of different places. We definitely think about them in the desert Southwest, and they do like a dry region, but there's different agaves, hundreds of species of agaves that live in different places. So most agaves like that drier setting, just like most succulents. So if you want to try to grow agave, you're going to want to find one that is hardy in your zone. Probably when you get into like zone 6, zone 5, it's going to be pretty hard to find an agave that can withstand that much cold. But there are definitely some that are in zone 7, definitely zone 8 and down and up. You'll find agaves that you can grow. If you grow them in a place that is already dry, you're probably going to be able to use your native soil, and it's going to be perfect. So in Albuquerque, in parts of Arizona, other parts of New Mexico, your native soil, your agave is going to be fine. It doesn't need like a rich, fertile soil like our vegetables do. Then, if you live in a place that gets more rain, your soil is probably going to be a little rich and possibly a little heavy for an agave. So if you want to try an agave, you might think about it in like a rock garden. You might think about it in up on a mound with really well-draining soil so that it doesn't get wet roots, because wet roots on an agave, not going to be good. So this would probably be something, it's a perennial. It would be something that's not in your vegetable garden. It would be in a different part of your yard, right? So then agaves, when do they flower? Well, it depends. It usually takes quite a few years. Some agaves are called century plants. Not all agaves take a whole century, most of them don't take a whole 100 years to bloom, but they do take years and years to bloom. And then interestingly, and maybe a little sad, agaves are monocarpic, which means they will bloom and they send up this big flower stalk, like 10, 12, even 15 feet tall, and then it opens up into these flowers, and then depending on where you live, you could have bats pollinating them. So they send up this huge flower stalk, they put all of their energy into this flower stalk to reproduce, and then the mother plant dies. But usually that mother plant will have produced pups. So think about those little, if you've ever done hens and chicks, you can think about the mother plant and the little pups off of there. Usually an agave will do the same thing. You'll have the big mother plant with pups. So they reproduce vegetatively. And then in theory, you could save your seeds and grow some more agave as well. So now, if you plant an agave, maybe several, and they flower, are you going to get bats? So the answer is maybe. It depends on where you live. So if you remember earlier, I mentioned bats, primarily tropical and subtropical regions, but they do come up into the southwestern US. So if you live in those regions, there's a possibility that you'll have some bats at your agave. But whether or not you have bats at your agave, they're still going to be great nectar and pollen producers for other pollinators. They're not exclusively pollinated by bats. So they're still a great plant to have in your landscape, especially if you live in a place that is more xeric. So, yeah, they're gorgeous. They're just gorgeous. So agaves, could you grow agaves for tequila? Maybe. But to get tequila, what they do is they have their blue agaves, agave azul, and they actually, so if you think of the agave plant, that rosette, they come in and they cut it off at the bottom. So they kill the plant when they harvest it for agave. Then they chop off all the outer stems or the outer leaves until they have that center stem. And then they'll mince it up and they'll ferment it. And that's what they make tequila out of. So technically, they can reproduce agave vegetatively. And a lot of tequila growers, or agave growers, are doing that. They're reproducing with the pups. So they're not letting the agave bloom before they make the tequila out of it, before they harvest it. But there's some bat conservationists partnering with farmers to have them allow like 1 or 2% of their crop to bloom, because the value of that is you get more diversity. So remember our bats, they're going to pollinate, right? They're going to fly from plant to plant. This is a saguaro. I should show you this picture, right? This is the saguaro flower. Here's that agave flower. So they're going to fly from plant to plant to plant, and they're going to help make more diverse genetic crosses. Because when you make a clone time after time after time, it's the same genetics. And if something attacks that plant and it's particularly susceptible to that, it could wipe out large portions. And that's happened in agave fields. Like there's basically kind of in one region there's 3 main clones, and one of them just got kind of decimated by a disease. So genetic diversity, thumbs up. Bats, thumbs up. So in these tequila regions, they are working with farmers, bat conservation groups to to have more agaves flowering. So whether you grow agave to try to make your own tequila, it's a big process. It's a big process. If you do that, you're dedicated, you know. You might be a tequila like connoisseur at that point, right? But in our own yards, in most of our yards, we might have agave because it's an interesting plant, because it's a beautiful plant, and because if we live in the right part of the US, we might be feeding bats. And wherever we live, we'll be feeding all kinds of other pollinators. So, bats, thank you for bananas. Bats, thank you for avocados. Bats, thank you for chocolate. And we'll be back tomorrow with another pollinator. So join me, and I'll collect all these in a pollinator, what do you call it, playlist? I'll collect them all in a playlist. And if you have a pollinator that you love or you want to tell me about, tell me in the comments. Leave me a question, leave me a comment. I do come back and watch those. Even if you are watching this later, I do come back and look at those, and I love to hear from you. All right, thanks so much for watching, and until I see you again, happy gardening.